Your brain could already be shrinking and you might not feel a thing. A major new study just released in November 2025 found that even mild hearing loss can increase your risk of dementia by 71%. And if you carry a certain gene, that risk nearly triples. I'm Dr. Layne Garrett, and if you're over 45, you need to hear this. So here's the backstory. The Framingham Heart Study has been tracking families in Massachusetts since 1948. We're talking about 3 generations of people who have been poked, prodded, scanned, and tested so researchers can understand what keeps us healthy and what doesn't. This new study looked at over 2,100 people. They tested their hearing, did brain scans, ran memory tests, and then followed them for 15 years to see who developed dementia. And what they found is honestly a wake-up call. People with even slight hearing loss. We're not talking about severe profound deafness here. We're talking about the kind where you're just asking people to repeat themselves a little more often. Those people had a 71% higher risk of developing dementia compared to people with normal hearing. Let me say that again. 71% higher risk. If you're finding this interesting, take a second to hit that like button. It really helps other people find this information. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. I put out new videos every week on hearing loss, tinnitus, and protecting your brain health as you age. All right, let's get back to what's actually happening in your brain. Now here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just about memory test. They actually looked at people's brain scans using MRIs. What they found was striking. People with hearing loss had smaller brain volume. Their brains were literally shrinking faster than those people with normal hearing. Think of it like the difference between a grape and a raisin. It doesn't happen overnight, but over time you start to see the toll. Less brain volume, less structure, less resilience. They also found something called white matter changes because the wiring of your brain wasn't as healthy. You can think of that like insulation on electrical wires. When it's new and intact, the signal can flow clean and strong. But as that insulation breaks down, cracks, frays, and breaks apart, the signal gets weaker, slower, and less reliable. That's what happens in the brain when hearing loss goes unaddressed. The connections start to misfire. So, why would your ears affect your brain? Well, there are a few theories. When you can't hear well, your brain has to work overtime just to understand what people are saying. That's exhausting. And that extra effort might be pulling resources away from other important brain functions like memory. There's also the social piece. When hearing gets difficult, a lot of people start avoiding conversations. They skip family gatherings, they stop going to church or community events, and that isolation, that's a known risk factor for cognitive decline all by itself. Your brain needs stimulation, it needs conversation, it needs to stay engaged with the world. And hearing loss quietly takes that away. Now here's something from this study that really caught my attention. Some people carry a gene called the APOE4. You don't need to remember that name. Just know that if you have it, you're already at higher risk for Alzheimer's disease. About 23% of the people in this study had it. For those folks, hearing loss didn't just raise their dementia risk by 71%, it nearly tripled it. That's a 186% increase. Now, most people don't know if they carry this gene, but here's the thing, you don't need to know, because whether you have it or not, addressing hearing loss is still one of the most controllable risk factors that you do have. You can't change your genes, but you can do something about your hearing. Here's the part that really concerns me as an audiologist. In this new study, they compared what people thought about their hearing versus what the actual hearing test showed. And for people with mild hearing loss, most of them had no idea. They weren't walking around thinking, boy, I should go get my hearing checked right now. They'd just gotten used to asking people to speak a little bit louder, or they blamed it on people mumbling. Or maybe they thought, well, restaurants are just loud these days. Does that sound familiar? It's only when hearing loss gets to moderate or severe levels that most people finally notice that something's wrong. But by then, according to this research, the brain changes have already been happening for years. That's why I'm such a believer in baseline hearing tests, especially once you hit your 50s. Not because I think everyone needs hearing aids, but because you need to know where you're starting from. You know that benchmark, so you can catch any change really early. Okay, I don't want this all to be doom and gloom because there's actually some really encouraging news buried in this study. When they looked at people with hearing loss who were using hearing aids versus those who weren't, the hearing aid users had a lower risk of dementia. Now, the researchers are careful to say that this does not prove hearing aids prevent dementia. This was an observational study, not a clinical trial. But it's consistent with what we've seen in other research, that treating hearing loss seems to protect the brain. And think about that. If one of the problems is that hearing loss leads to social isolation and reduced brain stimulation, then hearing aids do directly address that. They bring you back into conversations, they keep you connected. And I've seen this in my own practice for over 20 years. People come in withdrawn, frustrated, exhausted from straining to hear. A few months into wearing properly fitted hearing aids, and they're different people. More engaged, more confident, and more present with their families. Maybe that's also protecting their brains. This research suggests that might be. So let's talk practical steps. First, if you're over 50 and you haven't had a hearing test in the last few years, get one. Not the free screening at Costco, a real diagnostic evaluation with an audiologist. Get a complete picture of where your hearing stands. Second, if you have hearing loss and you've been putting off doing something about it, stop waiting. I know hearing aids can feel like a big step, and I know there's still some stigma associated with them. But we're not talking about vanity anymore. We're talking about brain health. We're talking about staying sharp for your kids, your grandkids, and your quality of life. Third, and this is super important, if you do get hearing aids, make sure whoever fits them is verifying their programming with real ear measurements. That's where they put a tiny microphone in your ear and actually measure what the hearing aid is doing. Only about 30% of providers are doing this right now, and it's the only way to know your hearing aids are programmed correctly for your specific hearing loss. A hearing aid that isn't fit right isn't going to give you the full benefit. And if we're trying to protect your brain, close enough isn't good enough. If you want to dig deeper into any of this, how hearing aids actually work, or what to look for in a provider, or more on the hearing-brain connection, I've put together a ton of resources in an online learning center. I'll drop a link in the description below. It's free and it's designed to help you make informed decisions about your hearing health. Okay, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and the research connecting hearing and brain health has been building for a long time now. But this Framingham study is one of the most comprehensive looks we've had so far on how hearing loss in midlife connects to dementia risk later on. The message is pretty clear. Your hearing matters more than you probably think, not just for conversations, not just for quality of life, but for your brain. Now I'm curious. Have you had your hearing tested recently, or maybe you've noticed changes that you've been putting off thinking about? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're at. I read every single one and I'd love to hear your story. And if you found this helpful, share it with someone you care about. Maybe someone who's been putting off getting their hearing checked. This might be the nudge that they need. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.